10-year-old Katherine Lyon and her sister, 12-year-old Sheila Lyon, lived in Kensington, Maryland in 1975. They lived with their parents, John and Mary, as well as their older brother, Jay. On March 25, 1975, Sheila and Katherine left their home between 11 a.m. and noon. Their mother instructed them to get back home by 4 p.m. They were heading to see the Easter exhibits in the Westfield Wheaton Plaza shopping mall, which was located about half a mile from their home. It was their spring break, so they planned on enjoying a day out, even having lunch at a pizzeria within the mall called the Orange Bowl. By 7 p.m., the Lyon sisters had still not returned home. Their parents then called police to report them missing. The extensive search and investigations for Sheila and Katherine revealed nothing about the location of the girls, but thanks to witness statements, it did help the police set up a timeline that they felt was accurate. At 1 p.m., a neighborhood boy saw the sisters outside the Orange Bowl. They were speaking to an unidentified man. At about 2 p.m., their elder brother Jay also noticed them at the pizzeria, alone and enjoying their meal. A friend of theirs then saw the girls walking westward down a street near the mall somewhere between 2:30 and 3 p.m. It was the direct route to their home. That was the last time Sheila and Katherine Lyon were seen alive. The neighborhood boy who recalled seeing Sheila and Katherine talking to someone outside the Orange Bowl described the unidentified man to be about 6 feet tall, 50 to 60 years old, and wearing a brown suit. He said that the man was carrying a briefcase with a tape recorder inside. The man was demonstrating a type of audio cassette player to the teens and children gathered near him, which included the Lyon sisters. 2 composite sketches of him were created and released to the public, and several other witnesses came forward to declare that they had seen him in the mall that day. A girl around Sheila and Katherine's age then talked to the detectives and gave them a completely new possible suspect. She described how the young girls had confronted a man who had been staring so intently at them that it made them uncomfortable enough to act. He was described as a white male, 5 foot 11 inches tall and weighing roughly 140 pounds. It was believed he was in his late teens or early 20s. He had acne on his face and scars on his left cheekbone. The man wore a light-colored Peters jacket, as well as a blue and white horizontal striped shirt with white pants. The Lyon sisters' disappearance shattered the sense of security in Kensington, Maryland, rattling parents to the point where they no longer let their children play outside or walk to Wheaton Plaza. Even with all the promising information, the case soon got plagued by false leads and questionable subjects, eventually making it go cold. An 18-year-old named Lloyd Lee Welsh went to a security guard at the Wheaton Mall a week after the girls disappeared. He said that he had been at the mall that day and saw the girls get abducted by the tape recorder man. Mall security then called the police, who took Lloyd to a nearby station. When the investigators made Lloyd take a lie detector test, he failed. Lloyd then confessed to having made the whole thing up. It was believed he was just interested in the $9,000 reward money being offered, and he was released. On April 7, 1975, about 2 weeks after the disappearance, a witness in Manassas, Virginia, reported seeing 2 girls resembling the Lyon sisters in the rear of a beige 1968 Ford station wagon. The witnesses stated that the girls were bound and gagged in the vehicle. The driver of the vehicle resembled the man in the publicly available composite sketch. The witness further claimed that when the driver spotted the witness tailing him, he ran a red light and sped west on Route 234 towards Interstate 66. The station wagon had Maryland license plates with the possible combination of DMT6. The last 2 numbers are unknown due to the bending of the car's plate. The known combination was issued in Cumberland, Hagerstown, and Baltimore at the time. This supposed sighting inspired a small army of mobile CB radio users to scour the area throughout the night with a running commentary and chatter, but without any tangible results. A search for matching plate numbers failed to produce any information. Although this witness's report was at first treated as credible, and a media firestorm erupted because of it, it was later deemed questionable by police. The disappearance granted calls from psychics, extortionists, and attention seekers. Several phone calls from people claiming to be holding the girls for ransom were made to the Lyon family in the immediate aftermath of their disappearance. One began with an anonymous mail on April 4, 1975, and demanded that John Lyon leave a briefcase with $10,000 inside an Annapolis courthouse restroom. John Lyon left $101 in the briefcase, as directed by law enforcement officials. It was just enough to make the crime a felony, but the briefcase was never claimed. The same anonymous person called John later and said there were too many police officers around the courthouse and he could not retrieve the ransom. John said he would have to hear the girls' voices before he could do anything else. The caller never made contact again. There were suspects, but nothing that linked them to the crime, one being Fred Howard Coffey. Coffey was convicted in 1987 for assaulting and strangling a 10-year-old girl in North Carolina in 1979. Authorities learned that he interviewed for a job and was subsequently employed in Silver Spring, Maryland, 6 days after the Lyon sisters vanished. This is a short distance from Wheaton Plaza. Investigators were unable to determine if Coffey was connected to the case, and he was never charged in the disappearances. Raymond Rudolph Molesky Sr., a resident of Suitland, Maryland, at the time of the disappearance, took the lives of both his wife and teenage son in November 1977. He was convicted and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Based on both prison informants' tips and Molesky's own claims to know something about the case, which he offered to share more fully in exchange for more favorable prison conditions, authorities searched his former residence in April 1982. No evidence was discovered. Raymond Rudolph Molesky passed away in prison in 2004. Police interviewed countless witnesses and followed hundreds of tips. Every stand of woods or weeds were searched. Storm sewers were explored, as was every vacant house for miles. The residents of a nearby nursing home were interviewed one by one. Scuba divers groped through mud at the bottom of ponds. Nothing was found. Nothing came of anything the police did. The case haunted the Montgomery County Police Department. Generations of detectives had come and gone, and many had taken a crack at it. Periodically, a new team would start over, combing through the many boxes of yellowing evidence, hoping to find something missed. In 2012, the Montgomery County Police Department decided to make one final push to solve the Lyon sisters' mystery. Their approach was to act as if a call had just come in for the two missing girls and to scour the boxes of case records as if starting from scratch. One of the most intriguing finds early on was a brief report written by investigators a week after the disappearances. The report was about 18-year-old Lloyd Lee Welsh that falsely claimed to see the tape recorder man abduct the sisters. The detectives newly plowing the case learned that Lloyd Welsh went on to compile an extensive criminal record. His record includes an arrest in 1977 in Montgomery County for breaking into a house 8 blocks from Wheaton Plaza Mall and stealing $580 worth of jewelry. The burglary case yielded a mugshot, which bore a striking resemblance to a composite sketch drawn in 1975 of the man at the mall who stared at the Lyon girls so long that they confronted him. The newly assigned detectives learned Welsh was imprisoned in Delaware after being convicted of assaulting a 10-year-old girl in that state in 1998. Detectives drove to see him, not sure what to expect. Would he even want to talk to them? It turns out he did. Welsh talked and talked for 8 hours. It was on October 16, 2013, that Detective Dave Davis traveled with Montgomery Deputy State's Attorney Pete Feeney to Dover, Delaware, to interview Welsh. He acknowledged he was at the mall the day the Lyon sisters were reported missing, but said he had no involvement in their disappearance. The investigators continued trying to uncover as much as they could about Welsh. They learned that his mother lost her life when the car driven by his drunken father, Lee, crashed. Lloyd Welsh was a passenger. He was placed in foster homes, but ran away to live on the streets instead, where he did whatever he wanted to. As an adult, he traveled around the country, sometimes hitchhiking, and at one point started a landscaping business in South Carolina. In that state, he was also convicted of assaulting a 10-year-old, just like in Delaware. As the detectives gathered Welsh's history, they repeatedly returned to interview him in Delaware. In subsequent interviews, Welsh lied elaborately and repeatedly about his connection to the Lyon case. He eventually admitted that he had helped kidnap the girls, but insisted that the crime had been planned and carried out by others in his family. He would talk for hours, shifting his story and offering names of relatives he said he had seen abduct the Lyon girls and hold them captive. In the summer of 2014, investigators began an extensive probe of the entire Welsh clan. What the detectives found shocked them. The clan had two branches, one in Hyattsville, Maryland, and the other 5 hours southwest on a secluded hilltop in Thaxton, Virginia. It was a place locals called Taylor's Mountain. Here, the family's Appalachian roots were still in existence, even though some members had gradually moved into more modern communities in and around Bedford, the nearest town. The family's mountain hollow ways, a suspicion of outsiders, an unruly contempt for authority of any kind, stubborn poverty, a knee-jerk resort to violence, set it perpetually at odds with mainstream suburbia. During one of the interviews, Welsh named relatives he had seen abuse and take the lives of at least one of the Lyon girls. If the sisters had been taken by this family, as Welsh claimed and the detectives now suspected, then someone in the family might help investigators with more information. In 2015, Welsh was claiming that the chief culprit had been his uncle Richard, who he said had planned the girls' kidnapping and demise. Richard Welsh was nearly 70 at the time, but seemed older. In addition to heart trouble, he faced a frightening array of accusations. Various family members had accused him of ugly and violent behavior toward them in the past. Richard Welsh denied it all. He was summoned to appear before a grand jury in February 2015, where he still stuck to his story. He said he never saw either of the Lyon sisters and did not know what happened to them. On May 12, 2015, detectives visited Lloyd Welsh again to see if he could tell them anything else. He continued spinning one story after the next to explain what had happened to Sheila and Katherine, always placing the blame for the crime on others. Gradually, and often inadvertently, he revealed more and more about himself and the crime. The detectives came to realize that you had to forget the narrative. The way to read Welsh was to look past his stories to their details. Running through many of his versions were certain particulars that recurred: stalking girls in the mall, a station wagon, a crying girl in the back seat, a basement accessed from the backyard, an axe, an army green duffel bag, and a bonfire. On a Monday in May 2015, Detective Dave Davis went looking for the place where Welsh said his Uncle Richard had taken Katherine's life, before stuffing her remains in a duffel bag and ordering him to take it to Taylor's Mountain. Uncle Richard's old house had been completely destroyed to make room for a new district court building, but Dave knew where it had been. Right away, Welsh's story didn't add up. The house was the last place you would bring two little girls who were the object of a massive manhunt. The house was right next to police headquarters. Dave next sought out Buchanan Street, which Lloyd Welsh had also mentioned and where members of the Welsh family had once lived. When Dave arrived there, he recognized the house from snapshots in the police file. It was the house where Lloyd Welsh's parents had lived. The current owners of the house led Dave to a basement, only accessed by walking around the house to the rear. Dave stepped into a dark, low-ceilinged stone dungeon heaped with old furniture. This was the place. He knew it. It was exactly where one would stash two frightened young girls. You could do anything without being seen or heard. Dave returned the next day with a forensics team. They squirted Blue Star spray to try and find any blood. It lit up from the floor to the ceiling. The room announced itself as the place where Sheila and Katherine Lyon, or at least one of them, spent their last moments. Welsh often talked about his Uncle Richard's sanctuary, but that was all untrue. This was the space where Lloyd Welsh hung out. It was his. Not long after Dave Davis found the likely crime scene, the case against Lloyd Welsh was solid enough to charge him. On September 12, 2017, he pleaded guilty to ending the lives of both Sheila and Katherine Lyon. Despite pleading guilty, he still claimed that his involvement was in fact very limited. He was given a 48-year sentence, and given that he was 60 years old in 2017, it was essentially a life sentence. Frustratingly, Lloyd Welsh still refuses to tell investigators where they can find the bodies. Investigators are still looking into the possibility that Lloyd Welsh did not act alone. Uncle Richard worked as a mall cop around the same time, and it would have been much easier for him to abduct the two girls than it would be for Lloyd Welsh. Let me know what you make of the case down in the comments section. Roger Scott Dunn was born on February 10, 1967 in Lubbock, Texas, one of two sons born to Jim and Mary Sue Dunn. Everyone referred to him as Scott. Scott was described as a jokester, fun-loving, and as a ladies' man. By 1991, the 24-year-old left the military and settled in Lubbock. He worked at MGM Electronics, where he installed custom sound systems in vehicles. He loved working on cars, and he had even won stereo installation competitions. He also bought, restored, and resold used automobiles on his own. Scott dated Leisha Hamilton. She was a 28-year-old waitress. On the evening of May 13, 1991, Scott attended a party at one of his friends' homes. Out of nowhere, Scott got seriously ill. He couldn't walk or drive home and slept at his friend's house. The next morning, Leisha came to pick him up so that he could rest in the comfort of his own bed at the apartment they shared at Oakwood Club Apartments at 5818 24th Street. The day after that, on May 15th, Scott was finally feeling well enough to get back to his work. His car was still at his friend's house, so he arranged for his friends to take him to work. He told Leisha about this arrangement. She made him tea and left for work. When his friends arrived at their apartment, Scott didn't answer. Leisha arrived home later and told his friends that he must have left while she was at work. Scott did not come home that night, and for the next 2 days there was absolutely no sign of him. Leisha then contacted Jim Dunn, Scott's dad, who lived in Pennsylvania, and told them that Scott disappeared. Jim Dunn then contacted the Lubbock Police Department to file a missing persons report. Jim told detectives that it was unusual for Scott to leave his Camaro, nicknamed the Yellow Submarine, and his tools at work. When the police arrived at Leisha and Scott's apartment, Leisha immediately told the police that a piece of carpet was missing from underneath the couch. In Scott's bedroom, the police found that missing piece of carpet. It had been duct taped together with the carpet in the bedroom. A piece of carpet had been removed from the bedroom. Along the seam, the police noticed a rusty-colored stain. It was clear that it was blood. There was another large stain on the padding underneath the carpet in one section. The blood on the padding had seeped down to the concrete below. It also looked like someone had cleaned blood off of the baseboard of the wall. The investigators used luminol to test the room. The room lit up. It was obvious that someone, presumably Scott, had suffered a violent attack. Investigators looked at Scott's life and the people he knew to see if anything stood out to them. Scott had a previous arrest for using illegal substances. At age 23, he was arrested in connection with a Domino's Pizza robbery. The police followed up on this to see if anyone might have had reasons to hurt Scott because of the substances or money. They didn't find anything useful. Looking at Scott's relationship with Leisha, investigators found a lot of oddities. It seemed that Scott wasn't able to commit to Leisha as much as she would have liked. 1 month before Scott's disappearance, Leisha had learned that Scott was engaged to another woman. Investigators saw this as a possible motive. Could Leisha have sought revenge against Scott? Scott's friends told investigators something worrisome about Leisha. A family friend of Scott said that Scott was afraid to break up with Leisha. Leisha's ex-boyfriends warned Scott that she could lather herself up into violent, jealous rages. Leisha continued to contact Jim to talk about the case. Jim taped all of their phone calls. For some reason, Leisha didn't really seem that interested in finding Scott. She often talked about his sports car. She even asked Jim if she could have it. Leisha told Jim that she didn't want the car but needed it. Leisha was clearly getting impatient about having to wait for the car. This was really odd behavior. Investigators learned that Leisha had a criminal record. She had been arrested in New Mexico for embezzlement. Investigators continued looking into the possibility that she was responsible, but then she actually came up with the first suspect. Leisha told Jim that she believed a man named Tim Smith was involved in Scott's disappearance. Tim lived near Scott and Leisha and became infatuated with her. The police went to speak to Tim at his apartment and saw that he was packing up to move. Tim willingly let the police search his apartment. When the police walked back out to the room where Tim was standing, they discovered that Tim had moved a roll of duct tape that was on his bookshelf. Tim claimed he didn't move anything, but the police found it hidden behind some books. The tape was sent in for forensic testing. Using infrared lights to look at different wavelengths and components of the tape, the results were that the tape from Tim's apartment were consistent with the tape used on the carpet in Scott's bedroom. On the side of the tape, triangular green carpet fibers were found, which were the same color as the carpet in Scott's bedroom. Unfortunately, without a body, there wasn't much else investigators could do, and the case went cold. Jim got impatient and set out to find answers himself. He met with a group called the Vidocq Society. It's a group of 82 international forensic experts. The group is a members-only group that meets in Philadelphia to try to solve unsolved crimes. Jim met with Richard Walter, a co-founder of the group, to go over the case of his son. Richard immediately confirmed that Scott is not alive anymore. Furthermore, he was convinced that Leisha held the answers. Richard sent the information to Dr. Richard Shepard of New Scotland Yard. Dr. Shepard concluded that Scott's life was taken in his bedroom and had been struck multiple times with a blunt object. He conducted multiple tests and confirmed that with the amount of blood that was lost, no one could have survived. Richard Walter begged the district attorney to take this case to trial. Richard said that they didn't have a body, but had a body part, the blood's connective tissue. Richard Walter noticed that there were unidentified hairs in the duct tape found in Scott's bedroom. It was sent in for testing and was determined to be hair from both Tim Smith and Leisha Hamilton. Smith and Hamilton were finally arrested 3 years after Scott disappeared in 1994. It is believed that Scott's life was taken in the early morning hours of May 16, 1991, while he was asleep. Scott was struck 4 times with a blunt object. Hamilton and Smith tried to clean up the scene, but obviously left behind too much evidence. It is believed that Leisha wanted revenge after finding out that Scott had been seeing other women and was engaged. Smith probably helped Hamilton because she manipulated him and he was obsessed with her. They were tried separately and both convicted. Leisha Hamilton was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and Smith was sentenced to 10 years of probation. The jury believed that Smith was involved in helping Hamilton clean up and get rid of evidence, but weren't convinced that he was in the room when the crime took place. It's not clear why Leisha got such a short sentence, in Texas no less, but she had to serve it in full after losing multiple bids for parole. Leisha dropped out of sight once she got out of prison. Frustratingly, neither Hamilton nor Smith wanted to tell police where they put Scott's body. There was much relief in 2012 when Lubbock Victims Assistance Services got word to Jim Dunn that a work crew had uncovered skeletal remains in a sewage system near Scott's apartment complex. Dental records confirmed they came from Scott. On June 16, 2012, the Dunns buried him in a grave beneath a stone engraved with a likeness of Scott's Camaro. Jim was quoted as saying, "I tell everyone that Scott came home for Father's Day."